Special envoy urged warring parties to renew the truce and end the conflict in Yemen. Houthis block peace efforts and are responsible for not extending the United Nations agreed truce. Life is normalized in Hajj district after liberation from the Houthi militia rule. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Rushan Fouad. The UN Security Council met yesterday to discuss the latest development in Yemen. Special Envoy for Yemen Hans Grunberg briefed the Council and urged the warring parties to renew and expand the truce. This report has more details.
The United Nations Special Envoy to Yemen, Hans Grunberg, in providing an overview of the situation in Yemen, Hans Grunberg said to the United Nations Security Council that in recent weeks, Houthi militia attacked oil terminals and ports in Hadramaut and Shabwa governorates, depriving the government of its main source of revenue from exporting oil. He warned that these attacks have significant economic repercussions that will undermine the welfare of the Yemeni people, risk setting off a spiral of military and economic escalation, and are prohibited by international humanitarian law. Grunberg informed the ambassadors of the United Nations Security Council that there is a concerning uptick in incidents in Ma'rib and Taiz, which included civilian casualties that demonstrate how fragile the situation remains. He also underscored the need for the parties to urgently reach an agreement to renew the truce, reiterating his call that they also exercise maximum restraint during this critical time. The United Nations envoy stressed the importance that ongoing peace discussions yield positive results as soon as possible, saying that he is engaging with the parties to not only expand the truce but to initiate discussions on a path towards a more comprehensive settlement of the conflict. Grunberg reiterated his conviction that for any settlement to be sustainable, it needs to be broad-based and includes all segments of the Yemeni society, from youth to civil society and women. For its part, the Yemeni government affirmed in its statement to the Security Council that the Iranian-backed terrorist Houthi militia choice of unprecedented escalation by refusing to renew the truce confirms its clear obstruction to peace efforts. The Yemeni government said despite the full response to the terms of the truce and the transition from a state of war to a state of peace, the militia seeks to thwart all the benefits that have been achieved for the Yemeni people during the past 6 months. The government added that the Houthis evade peace entitlements and target the economic foundations and infrastructure in a deliberate war crime. The government pointed out that these terrorist acts led to the suspension of vital port exports, seeking to plunge the country into a comprehensive economic and humanitarian crisis. The government pointed out that the militia recently imposed a draft of professional behavior code, which forces all civil servants to adopt the extremist ideology of the Houthi militia. It concluded that the matter required the international community and the Security Council to assume their responsibilities and to take strict measures regarding this dangerous Houthi escalation and to stop these threats and terrorist acts.
The United Nations urged the parties to the conflict to renew the truce as a first step for comprehensive peace in the country. Farhan Haq, deputy spokesperson for the United Nations, called on the parties to exercise maximum restraint after worrying signs of fighting. He added that people in Yemen have been suffering for many years and they enjoyed the period of calm during the last truce. Yemen has had a relative period of calm during the past 7 months due to the UN-agreed ceasefire. Yet Houthis have rejected to renew the truce because their perception of the truce is different from all the other stakeholders. For them, the truce is no more but a strategic pause after which they can regroup. This report gives more details.
Yemen's six-month truce ended on October 2nd despite frantic last-minute shuttle diplomacy and substantial international pressure. In the weeks since, the Houthis have deployed drones to assault oil terminals in Shabwa and Hadramaut. Saudi Arabia has been put on high alert for a possible Iranian attack, and the U.S. Navy has intercepted a fishing vessel en route to Yemen carrying a substantial quantity of explosive materials from Iran. Late in September and early in October, Grunberg made a brave attempt to renew the ceasefire by requesting an additional 6 months from the parties. Grunberg's suggestion also included a call for the Yemeni government to follow through on its pledge to pay the salaries and pensions of state officials working in Houthi-controlled regions. This has been a source of contention for the Houthis, who lack the financial resources to pay the salaries themselves. In response to Grunberg's proposal, the Houthis demanded that police, security, and military personnel be included in the list of civil workers. In essence, they were asking the Yemeni government to pay the wages of the soldiers they were fighting. The demand was described as maximalist and impossible by Lunderking. The truce ended, however, when the Houthis refused to back down. 2 weeks later, Saudi Arabia called the Houthis to direct negotiations in Riyadh in an attempt to restart peace talks. Direct discussions with Saudi Arabia, like civil servant wages, have long been on the Houthis' list of demands. But, as with Grunberg's proposal, the Houthis pocketed the offer and responded by asking that Saudi Arabia eliminate all restrictions and pay all wages, including those of security and military personnel, as a prerequisite for discussions. Unsurprisingly, the negotiations did not take place. Both of these incidents show that the Houthis are not interested in extending the truce or using it as a stepping stone to a more comprehensive settlement. Throughout the summer, they saw the truce as being in their best interest, just as they now see the continuation of the conflict as the best way to attain their goals. At the moment, the Houthis believe that fighting would be more beneficial to them than peace.
The Yemeni government stressed that it will not tolerate Houthi terrorist attacks that would disrupt the activities of economic facilities. The government added the terrorist Houthi militia is writing its end by their own hands and by starving Yemenis and destroying their economy. The government considered the attack on oil ports and installations a declaration of war by the rebel militia and their supporters in Tehran. Citizens protested in Taiz against the local authority control and the fragile security in the city.
Our demand is to restore security in the city of Taiz, stopping criminal gangs, stopping the looting of lands, and stopping the crimes in general. We are calling for reforming the security apparatus and stopping violations against the citizens. We call all the concerned authorities, such as the PLC and the Ministry of Interior, to reform these institutions and to restore security in Taiz. We denounce all the criminal acts that are perpetrated by some lawless elements who could be counted in numbers. However, they are being protected by some military units in Taiz. We call on the concerned bodies to swiftly detain these criminal elements who have filled Taiz with crimes and killing. We call on the Ministers of Defense and Interior to target the military units to hand over those criminals who we see by our eyes in the markets as if they do not do any crimes at all.
A child was seriously injured as a result of a Houthi inline mine explosion in Hodeidah. Days ago, 11 civilians, including women and children, were injured in Houthi mine explosion. Hais and Hodeidah is among the districts which were liberated from the Houthi militia. People went out to the streets to celebrate the first anniversary of liberation. The following report gives more details.
Hais governorate in Hodeidah is celebrating its freedom anniversary. It was completely liberated from the Houthi militia and became secured on the 21st and the 22nd of November of last year. People are hoping for the rest of the directorates to be liberated as well, to enjoy security and stability.
We are blessed now after the liberation of Hais district, and life got back to normal and improved the economic situation that was deteriorated for 4 years in a row. Now, markets are reactivated and life is better for all. People now are relieved after the joint forces liberated Hais and the west countryside of Taiz governorate, as the Houthi militia cut off roads from the countryside to the city and imposed provocative measures in checkpoints, such as searching people's cell phones and checking out their personal identity as if they were strangers.
After years of siege, the citizens are content, and it's reflected on their faces when remembering the past that had exhausted and irritated them. As a result of the Houthi gangs' practices against the people, a siege, a severing of relationship bonds and persecution that made the people miserable.
We felt happy when the joint forces came here and liberated us from the Houthi militia. We experienced hard times. Citizens couldn't commute between villages unless they carried their IDs with them plus invade their cell phone privacy. Services are established since the liberation, as well as NGOs provided us with aid. The countryside was sieged and it was not allowed to get in until 5 to 7 hours. But now, after the liberation, it takes only 5 minutes. Previously, food trucks could only enter the area once a week, unlike now, the markets are revived.
4 years have passed since the liberation of Hais. The people lived days and nights in terror and fear due to the bombing and targeting civilians. All that came into an end when the joint forces took an action. In the operation of the joint forces launched after repositioning on the coastal line after the United Nations restricted them under the Stockholm Agreement. Today, people are delighted of the liberation from a militia that was perched on their chests for years.
Military forces shot down a drone in Abyan, southern Yemen. A security source said that a drone likely to belong to the Houthi militia flew from several minutes over separate locations before it was shot down by ground defenses. Coming next. The United Nations says fate of Safer tanker to be determined after salvage operation is over.
ننشر ندي ماء من الغيل والغيلة بعيد، كنا ندي بالدواب نعبي ماء ورجعنا. كنا ننزل الساعة 5 رجعنا الساعة 9.
ما يجي لنا ظهر لأنه زحمة ما حد يخلي الجهل يغرق، وإحنا تعبنا زيادة.
وكنت أحس صدري يوجعني وعز قدرك ركبي يوجعيني.
كنا بنستخدم حتى نغسل أولادنا يعني بأيام معدودة. كنت أغيب على المدرسة لأن أنا كنت أروح الديمة.
حتى وإن كان يجي الأمطار تروح هدر لأنه ما في معي غزالة.
الوقت نشتري ب30,000 دي مع هستيلك ما يغلقش معها الشهر.
بس راح تطلب الله ولا أي حاجة، عاملة كل شغلك الماء.
Welcome back. The United Nations announced the start of Safer tanker salvage operation. According to some informed sources, the fate of the decaying tanker would be agreed upon later after the salvage operation is completed. The following report gives more details.
Since the start of Yemen's devastating civil war 7 years ago, the FSO Safer has received almost no maintenance. The FSO Safer was built in 1976 as a supertanker and later converted into an oil storage and offloading facility. The abandoned oil tanker that is looming in the coast of Yemen is currently being loaded. The head of the Yemeni Maritime Authority has ruled out the possibility of a fresh dispute erupting and impeding this operation. After the tanker has been unloaded, the government and the Houthi forces supported by Iran will decide what will happen to it. The two parties will also agree on how to sail more than 1 million barrels of crude oil that are on board, highlighting the importance of the tanker's unloading procedure in order to prevent an environmental catastrophe. The Maritime Affairs Authority and other concerned government organizations, such as the Public Authority for Environmental Protection, are mostly worried about emptying the supertanker. Safer will be cleaned out during the first several months of 2023. The floating Safer oil tanker has long been considered a ticking bomb because it's carrying over 140,000 tons of crude oil and has been left moored off Yemen for years. The catastrophe would be 4 times larger than the Valdez, Alaska oil spill if all the oil on board leaked. Now, just formalities are followed, and the UN and other international organizations are used as a framework. In terms of practical steps, there are now arrangements with an international company specializing in this field to unload the cargo onto another vessel.
Climate change has affected many nations. The concluding statement of the past COP27 conference in Egypt affirmed that vulnerable countries like Yemen will be given funding as compensation to combat climate crisis. This report has more on this.
The COP27 international event that took place in Egypt has reached an agreement to help the most vulnerable countries affected by climate change. However, conflict-ravaged Yemen is unlikely to receive any support from the new climate fund agreed upon, according to aid agencies. But although Yemen is one of the world's poorest countries and vulnerable to climate change impacts, it doesn't have the means to access climate finance. International Committee for the Red Cross Director General warned that close to zero amount of climate finance is reaching conflict-affected nations because decision-makers who decide to allocate those funds consider that it's too risky to invest there. Yemen has also suffered droughts, soil erosion, and worsening floods every year. According to the UN Agriculture Agency, this year's rainfall was 45% higher than in 2021, and at least 72 people were killed by flooding this year, with 74,000 families in 19 of the 22 governorates affected. Over 12,000 internally displaced families in Maghreb have been damaged by flooding, alongside the communities who have been hosting them. The most hard-hit governorates have been Hajja and Mahwit in the northwest, and Maghreb in central Yemen. However, with torrential rains forecasted to continue, casualties and destruction figures are expected to rise throughout the country. The scale of devastation means additional funding is urgently needed to support affected families who may be at risk of becoming displaced once again. In flood situations, the risk of waterborne diseases such as cholera and diarrhea also increases. And at least 18 governorates across Yemen have seen the highest rainfall since July this year, with widespread destructive flash floods, resulting in infrastructure, homes, food stock, and livestock being washed away.
The United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, Rina Jailani, said hunger still haunts more than half of the population in Yemen. Jailani added new estimates indicate that the number of people facing acute food insecurity between October and December is slightly lower than initial expectations in early 2022. Yet she hastened to say these estimates don't negate the fact that 70 million people don't know how to get their next meal. Here is a reminder of the main headlines. UN Special Envoy urges warring parties to renew the truce and end the conflict in Yemen. Houthis block peace efforts and are responsible for not extending the United Nations agreed truce. Life is normalized in Hais district after liberation from the Houthi militia rule. This is the end of the news. It was Roshan Fouad. Thank you for watching.